What did Ebenezer do in the war, Daddy? I'm going to tell you a story of history and archaeology as it pertains to the town of Ebenezer before, during, and after the American Revolution. What was known about Ebenezer in the American Revolution prior to December 1984, that's a magic time, my birthday, I first began my study in Effingham County, about 7 miles over that way on the Fort Howard paper mill. Oral tradition, or myth, holds that the British used this church, or the previous version of this church, no, it's this church, yeah, that's right, as a hospital and a stable for their horses, and that some Yahoo shot a hole through the swan weather vane atop the church steeple. Not a lot else was known. What have we learned about Ebenezer and the American Revolution over the past 40 years? Quite a bit, actually. I'm going to start with a history lesson. Of Ebenezer Creek and the Savannah River. This was known as Red Bluff. By 1775, most of Ebenezer Creek was settled by German-speaking colonists, including the Salzburgers. Other German settlers also joined due to their shared language and Lutheran faith. Slide. In the years preceding the American Revolution, Ebenezer faced internal strife. By 1765, the town had dwindled to 12 houses. The death of Reverend Bolsius in 1765 and the arrival of Reverend Tribner in 1769 further divided the church congregation. In 1774, tensions escalated as supporters of the Reverend Ravenhorst, led by John Adam Trutland, guarded the Jerusalem church door against Reverend Tribner's followers, and they were led by John Casper Wirch. Reverend Henry Muhlenberg arrived from Pennsylvania in early November 1774 to mediate the dispute. Reverend Muhlenberg initially ruled in Ravenhorst's favor, but the victory was short-lived. Following Ravenhorst's death on December 30th, 1776, Reverend Tribner became the sole clergy at Ebenezer. However, the Jerusalem congregation did not accept Tribner as their religious leader, as expressed in a letter to Muhlenberg in February 1777. The letter was signed by men with the surnames Google, Heinley, Mueller, Neidlinger, Remschardt, Schubtrein, and Waldauer. Any of those names ring a bell? In an October letter to Muhlenberg, Tribner remarked, "The greater part of the congregation desires that I preach again in the church. But because they do not agree amongst themselves, and especially the carpenter, Johann Schubtrein, the tanner, Ulrich Neidlinger, and the shoemaker, John Kugel, are opposed and threatened with murder and killing. I will bide my time." In 1777, Ebenezer and coastal Georgia were under Patriot control. Royal Governor James Wright of Georgia had fled Savannah. John Adam Trutland, a key supporter of Ravenhorst, served as Georgia's governor from May 1777 to January 78. In 1778, a significant amount of military supplies were stored at Ebenezer, and a magazine guarded by a dozen, or 16 actually, Georgia militia and Georgia Continentals. They kind of took turns guarding the gunpowder and the lead and the guns. Slide. Lieutenant Colonel Archibald Campbell, in a British invasion fleet from New York, arrived in Georgia on December 27, 1778. He led the New York Volunteers, the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 71st Highland Regiment, the 1st and 2nd Battalions of Delancey's Brigade, and the 3rd Battalion of Cortland Skinner's New Jersey Volunteers, as well as 2 Hessian mercenary regiments. Campbell's troops quickly captured Savannah on December 29th and routed the Continentals, who were commanded by Major General Robert Howe. Campbell's forces, except for the Hessians, set out from Savannah for Ebenezer on New Year's Day. The following day, Reverend Tribner welcomed the British forces into Ebenezer. Meanwhile, Brigadier General Augustine Prevost, also known as Bullet Head, He was injured in the French and Indian War with a piece of grape shot in his skull, and they fixed it, and he lived. Meanwhile, Prevost led British and Loyalist troops from St. Augustine, East Florida, in the capture of Sunbury and Fort Morris in Georgia. His troops included the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Battalions of the 60th Regiment, also known as the Royal Green Jackets, I think, a detachment of the 16th Regiment, and 300 other Loyalists, who included the South Carolina Royalists and the King's Rangers, also some Loyalist Indians. By late January 1779, Prevost established his headquarters here at Ebenezer. At the same time, across the Savannah River from Ebenezer at Perrysburg, down that way about 7 miles or so, a large army was encamped. Major General Benjamin Lincoln's Patriots, who numbered more than 4,000 men, faced off against Prevost's British forces, who were only 3,500 men. The Americans maintained its headquarters over there, preventing the British from crossing the river. But after the defeat at Briar Creek in March of '79, the American command retreated into South Carolina. On April 27, '79, General Prevost launched a campaign to retake Charleston, and his forces, who were based here at Ebenezer, marched south about 10 miles to Abercorn Creek, where they boarded flatboats and continued till midnight or so towards Perrysburg, South Carolina, which is where the headquarters were for the Americans. After a scorched earth march, the British approached Charleston, but General Lincoln's army arrived in time, and the British were unable to take it. Prevost's army returned to its base in Georgia. In 1779, a joint Franco-American siege of Savannah unfolded, lasting from mid-September to October 9th. The British emerged victorious, inflicting heavy losses on the Patriots and French. The subsequent year saw the British launch another campaign on Charleston, and they conquered the city by May of that year. By early June, Prevost had been replaced by Lieutenant Colonel Louis Clark, and Prevost retired to England. During the American Revolutionary War, British troops stationed at Ebenezer included Hessian mercenaries. Two regiments of about 221 men were initially posted in Savannah, but they marched to Ebenezer in late January of '79. In June 1780, In June 1780, a detachment from the Nobloch, who were formerly known as the Wissenbach Regiment, they arrived at Ebenezer. Their mission was to relieve an English-speaking detachment that was stationed here, and they served for about 1.5 months. 1 year later, Colonel Friedrich von Vorbeck noted that the Nobloch Regiment marched on command with 2 captains, 4 officers, 11 non-commissioned officers, 1 army surgeon, 3 drummers, 3 artillerymen, and 110 men of the regiment. And he also noted that Major Goebel commanded at Ebenezer with 2 captains, 4 lieutenants, 11 non-commissioned officers, 1 medic, 3 drummers, and 130 privates to protect the district from rebel ruination by murder and arson. Ebenezer's hardcore loyalists, led by Reverend Tribner, left town in early December 1781, on my birthday, along with the Hessian troops. Their journey took them to Savannah, then to East Florida, then to the Bahamas. After Georgia's Governor Martin offered them amnesty, dozens of Hessian soldiers in Savannah deserted the British, and a few took up residence around this area. While no major battle ever took place at Ebenezer, at least 2 skirmishes were reported. The first was Casimir Pulaski's cavalry raid, his last successful battle, on the nearly empty town in September 11th, '79. Another lesser-known skirmish took place April 18th, 1781. This is a really obscure one. Possession of Ebenezer and the surrounding area flipped in February 1782 with the arrival of the Continental Army troops. Major General Anthony Wayne, also known as Mad Anthony Wayne, and his Continentals arrived at Ebenezer. Hessian Vorbeck wrote on February 2nd that Rebel General Wayne occupied Ebenezer and Cherokee Hill, which is down the road where the landfill is, after our rapid withdrawal. The enemy supposedly numbered 300 militia on foot and 200 light dragoons, but they pay no attention to our side's cavalry. Slide. Prior to Wayne's arrival, 35 men of Ebenezer surrendered and swore their loyalty to the United States. At least 22 of these people had German surnames. So this is a list of questionable people, whether or not they were loyalists before that, but they surrendered. They actually surrendered before Wayne got here, so they were sitting on ready. In Georgia, General Wayne's army at Ebenezer consisted of fewer than 400 men. Colonel Jackson's Georgia Legion comprised about 40 horsemen and 50 foot soldiers, along with about 100 volunteer horsemen. Colonel Elijah Clark, who led the Wilkes County Militia, arrived in Ebenezer shortly after March 23rd, 1782. His mission was to establish a 200-man rifle regiment, but by July, only about 100 people had been recruited. Captain Patrick Carr led a newly formed unit called Carr's Independent Company, which included two companies, one of dragoons and one of riflemen. Notably, these were composed of volunteers and reclaimed citizens who were former Georgia loyalists. The Georgia Continental Army was decimated from battles that happened in 1778 and 1779. By 1782, it was reconstituted as the Georgia Battalion. It was commanded by Major John Habersham. Wayne's forces expanded on April 7, 1782, with the arrival of Colonel Thomas Posey's Virginia Continental Battalion. That organization was composed of the consolidated remnants of a bunch of Virginia regiments, Continental Army regiments, whose ranks were decimated in battles at Charleston in May of 1780 and at Yorktown in October of 1781. They numbered about 550 men, and this rose Wayne's combined forces by mid-April of that year to about 1,500 men. As the Patriot forces grew stronger, they took advantage of the British reluctance to venture beyond Savannah. Bear in mind that this was after Yorktown. For most historians, the war's over already, right? General Wayne, ever cautious, changed his location frequently to guard against surprise attacks, with Ebenezer serving as his primary headquarters. Over the next 5 months, various military actions unfolded around Ebenezer, featuring skirmishes and small battles involving British regulars, King's Rangers, Loyalist militia, and Creek, Choctaw, and Chickasaw Loyalist allies. In May 1782, the British High Command of Charleston and Savannah received word of Great Britain's desire for a cessation of hostilities with the United States of America. General Wayne learned of this through captured British correspondence and from letters to Wayne from General Clark and Royal Governor James Wright. By late June, Georgia Governor John Martin had arrived here, and the Georgia General Assembly convened on July 2nd. This enshrined Ebenezer's status as a former capital of Georgia, albeit for only 2 days. As the war in Georgia neared its end, the British planned their exit. General Wayne and his troops departed Ebenezer and successfully reclaimed Savannah for the Patriots on July 11th. A formal peace treaty between Great Britain and the U.S. was signed in Paris on September 3rd, 1783. The after effects of the American Revolution had a lasting impact on Ebenezer. The town was devastated by years of military occupation by the two armies. Many dwellings were destroyed and families were torn apart. Jenkins Davis, a resident of Ebenezer's Mill District, wrote to Reverend Muhlenberg on March 18, 1783, noting that upon his return here in January 1782, I found Ebenezer in a most deplorable situation. The people lost most of their property, the church very much damaged, and most of the houses, and only 2 families in the town. Most 2/3 of the inhabitants in and about Ebenezer being either dead or carried off by the British. Others noted that Zion Church had been destroyed by the British, as had Ebenezer's mills. Several of Ebenezer's residents, including Davis, told Muhlenberg that Reverend Tribner had absconded with the money, bonds, and other documents belonging to the church and members of the congregation. Joseph Hangleiter wrote on May 5th, 1783, "You cannot imagine how sad it looks in Ebenezer. When I come to town and look at our church, well, the church is still standing, but there are no doors, no shutters, no windows, no pews, no pulpit." In 1782, loyalists from Ebenezer fled Georgia and never looked back. Some found refuge in the Bahamas, while others settled in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, Canada. Among them were Reverend Tribner, who led a group of about 30 individuals to the Bahamas. Later, Tribner and his family sailed for England, where he embarked on a second career as a Lutheran minister. The state legislature permanently barred Tribner from returning to Georgia. Interestingly, though, his eldest son defied the ban, marrying the daughter of a patriot, and he remained in Effingham County. Reverend Tribner chronicled his experiences at Ebenezer during the war in a book, but no copies have been found. During its time as a military headquarters, Ebenezer served as a hospital for both British and Patriot troops. Surgeon Robert Jackson, who was attached to the British 71st Regiment, documented his experiences here in 2 books. Both of these books are available on Google Books. Additionally, there was a great swamp hospital at Ebenezer that's referenced by several patriots in 1782. It likely contains the remains of war veterans on both sides, possibly. The location of these hospitals remains undiscovered. Now, shifting gears, slide. I want to discuss the archaeological evidence for the American Revolution here. Slide. Our archaeology of Ebenezer's Revolutionary War history was jump-started in August 2001 when the LAMAR Institute was awarded a battlefield survey grant by the National Park Service's American Battlefield Protection Program. We also found, soon after that, excavating for the social hall, we found numerous cooking pits, trash-filled well, dating to the Revolutionary War period, containing soldiers' trash. That was 2002. And additional battlefield survey projects by the LAMAR Institute and other companies at Briar Creek, Carr's Fork, Kettle Creek, Perrysburg, South Carolina, Savannah, and Sunbury, all of which we participated in, resulted in a better defined Revolutionary War landscape in Georgia and adjacent parts of South Carolina. Numerous military landscape features have been identified and mapped at Ebenezer. Archaeologists have identified the location of 8 earthen redoubts, little small mini forts, all likely from the Revolutionary War period. Our research team located and mapped segments of the Abattis line, which is a row of sharpened brush or sticks, with adjacent ditch work, and infantry rifle trenches parallel to the Augusta Road. Slide. Archaeology confirms that Major General Wayne dutifully followed Nathaniel Greene's June 1782 orders to level the various forts before he left town, as we encountered Redoubt 3, shown here, entirely backfilled and was only recognized after a ground-penetrating radar survey and excavation of 2 excavation units in its ditch work. So, this is a 1779 map. It shows this little octagonal fort. I thought it was kind of stylized, cartographer's license to draw it that way. But when we did the ground-penetrating radar, sure enough, there's a big octagon out there in the parking lot. There's no visible sign of it on the surface. In fact, there's a dip there from a 19th century road that cuts across it, so you can't see any trace of this thing. But it's there. Lost my place. Redoubt number 2, not shown here, was almost entirely backfilled and only recognized by a scatter of musket balls and buckshot that were located by a controlled metal detector survey. Readout number 6 was approximate, which is located several miles that way, was approximately 60% backfilled, but the remainder that lies in the woods is remarkably intact. Slide. Of all the British earthworks, only readout number 4, shown here, remains above ground, and it's in nearly pristine condition. Its survival suggests that this was the fort that General Wayne picked to leave intact as a refuge to the townspeople. So this was a topographic map that we made of this earthwork that you can walk out and see if you go to the retreat center and walk to the end of the road. We had no idea it looked this good. And there again, that looks exactly like the 1779 drawing, except that they added a little appendix up here to put in another cannon position after the map was drawn. But here's the entrance, and it would have been fortified. And then in 2016, we did a controlled metal detector survey in here and found several cannonballs showing where the cannons probably sat facing out toward the old Augusta Road. Slide. Oops. This map shows the distribution of arms artifacts at Ebenezer. Flintlock weapons existed at Ebenezer throughout colonial times. During our extensive archaeological work at Ebenezer, our collection of gun hardware is surprisingly slim. It consists of about 24 artifacts, including 2 gun barrel sections, a nearly complete gun lock, 2 lock plates, a gun cock, 2 frizens, 5 trigger guards, 3 side plates, 2 butt plates, and 1 breech plug. Measurements from gun barrels excavated from readout number 3 reveal that these were not British military muskets, so they were smaller gauge weapons. Slide. Lead balls played a crucial role in pinpointing the location of the largest British readouts in Ebenezer. In 2002, Metal Detector Survey located and mapped 42 lead balls within British Readout 3. Analyzing a broader sample of 95 lead balls, researchers gained insights into the small arms used at Ebenezer. Slide. In 2014, archaeologists from the LAMAR Institute and the National Park Service employed PXRF, portable X-ray fluorescence technology, to analyze the elemental composition of lead balls recovered from early battlefields in Georgia and South Carolina. Slide. Notably, the absence of tin and antimony, and these lead balls strongly suggests that the ammunition from Ebenezer that we found here was mostly of British origin. So the British had clean lead, the Patriots had lousy lead. The Patriots added tin and antimony to the lead, maybe because they were melting down pewter plates to make bullets out of, perhaps, because both of those are components of pewter. Slide. Gunflints are another artifact type at Ebenezer that provides clues to the weapons that were present. Because most of the gunflints that we've recovered from Ebenezer date prior to the American Revolution, they're really only useful for identifying weapons prior to the war. We did, however, find some gunflints associated with the Revolutionary War at three areas of town. British Readout number 3, the Octagon, and Rince's Tavern, which was nearby that. And also at the military camp that was located just on the other side of the church here. Slide. Exciting stuff, though. We found evidence of light artillery at 2 locations. One is a well, now covered by the social hall, behind the church, and also within the earthen ramparts of readout number 4, the one that's still there that I mentioned earlier. Slide. Altogether, we recovered 9 cannonballs from Ebenezer. All 9 balls were intended for use with a 4-pounder, the cannonballs weigh 4 pounds, smoothbore cannon. Slide. Ebenezer possessed both Patriot and British artillery during the war. General Wayne's artillery unit had three 3-pounder cannons, so small, those cannonballs would not fit in a 3-pounder. The British possessed a variety of artillery pieces, such as mortars, hand grenades, and 3, 4, 9, 12, and 18-pounder cannons. Those have been captured at Sunbury and at Savannah by the Royal Artillery with General Prevost. Jonathan Fairland, who commanded the Light Royal Artillery Regiment, was stationed here at Ebenezer in 1780. Cannonballs from Ebenezer lacked any distinguishing marks, unfortunately, but the elemental analysis of these cannonballs does reveal some important differences, particularly in the presence of manganese in the cast iron, which is more common in Patriot cannonballs. Next slide. So, you can't see these lines, but most of the cannonballs had very little manganese in them, but one or two had quite a bit. The ones that are up here, the couple that were there, are most likely Patriot. The British cast iron cannonballs were almost all iron. The addition of manganese, they didn't know it yet, but that drives out the bubbles in the cast iron. And by 1790, they figured that out, and it was patented in England and the U.S., and they started making cannonballs with manganese in them. But the Americans got the edge on the British. It was kind of like shooting wiffle balls versus a really hard baseball or something. So the heavier, denser cannonballs without the air bubbles in them would have given the Americans a slight advantage, although they probably didn't recognize that was why. Okay. Ebenezer was a significant British and American stronghold during the American Revolution. Slide. It served as the initial headquarters for the British and Loyalist forces during the Southern Campaign of 1778 and 79. It was also the staging for the failed British campaign to take Charleston in 79, and the October 1780 campaign up into the Carolina upcountry, which resulted in a couple of British failures at Kings Mountain and Cowpens. From a Patriot perspective, Ebenezer was a safe haven for munitions storage in 1778. The town was briefly recaptured by Brigadier General Casimir Pulaski's cavalry in September 1779. Ebenezer served as General Wayne's primary headquarters for the Patriots in Georgia from February to July 1782. Slide. Due to time constraints, I've omitted numerous details about the military units, individuals, and events in Ebenezer during the war. For more information, please visit the LAMAR Institute's website, where you can access relevant reports for free. More reports on the topic are forthcoming. Thank you for your attention on this stormy day, and last slide.